Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
I want to believe in ghosts. If anyone can recommend some good reading material to convince me one way or the other, I would much appreciate it. I don't believe in ghosts, but I cannot deny that people who do believe in ghosts believe in them for some reason. Whatever evidence is going to push me over the edge would have to make sense to me, though. So here are my thoughts. Ghosts seem to come in two forms: visible and intangible, apparitions, and tangible and invisible, poltergeists. I have a hard time believing that these are both the same phenomenon. Apparitions disappearing and walking through walls and such doesn't really mesh well with the fact that they seem to be reflecting light to produce an image in your eyes. If apparitions exist, I would tend to believe that they are hallucinations, either created in the mind of the observer or placed in the mind of the observer by whatever entity this is, and the image is not actually an optical one. Poltergeists being able to move things with a force that can act upon matter while being totally invisible is an odd idea. Are they standing on some surface in another dimension so that they can impart this force? How do they generate momentum? Do they displace air? Is it creating some low-pressure zone to suck things around? What is its energy source to continue existing? It's bizarre to me. Maybe they are actually totally corporeal, and you could trap one in a room if you locked the door, and photons just pass through them somehow. It's all very strange. And the idea of a consciousness floating around, ignoring gravity, and being selectively tangible to whatever it wants to push over just isn't cutting it for me.
Ghosts do not seem to be sentient. If I could persist without eating or drinking or breathing and could move around unhindered by mortal limitations, I would be doing much more interesting things than haunting some poor family's basement. I would be looking for Atlantis or exploring the pyramids or writing spooky messages on a mirror that is currently being filmed on live international television. That isn't even considering what questions have been raised once you find yourself persisting after death, and how many mysteries regarding that there would be to solve. But for some reason, these ghosts are either mindless stuff movers or they're echoes of someone in their dying moments, very much unchanging and strangely mortal, though incorporeal. Another aspect is that ghost sightings must be sighted by humans, aside from security camera apparitions, and that means we always have the confounding variable of the human. I'm leaning towards believing that most ghost activity is actually human-generated, since telekinesis or psychically broadcasted apparitions seem like a much shorter leap of faith than human spirits persisting after death, yet embodying only the most worldly attributes of the body and habits of the person near death, with none of the intelligence or creativity which a soul imparts to us while we are alive. I have heard references to shadow people, and that intrigues me. Poltergeist phenomena being caused by some kind of non-human creature with different motivations than our own, which look vaguely like humanoid apparitions, would answer a lot of questions. I would just wonder how they came to be and what they do when they aren't spooking us. If anyone here can answer my questions or point me in the right direction, I would much appreciate it. Last book recommendation I got on 4chan was Operators and Things, and that's one of my favorite books now, so I'm looking forward to more.
I think a lot of ghost stuff is fake, which dilutes the available body of evidence as to what exactly ghosts are. I know human beings are capable of intaking information which otherwise is physically inaccessible to them, but I also haven't seen any hard evidence for telekinesis being based in reality. It's hard to say exactly what the phenomenon could be, although it definitely exists and obviously either directly has to do with humans or directly results from an interaction with humans. There are no dinosaur ghosts after all, or chair ghosts, or Intel Pentium Dual CPU E2200 ghosts. My best guess is it has something to do with the latent background consciousness of the area, that ghosts might be stains or echoes of a person's consciousness, not an actual representation of the consciousness proper.
Humans imprinting or encoding some kind of memory into the surrounding physical world is something I've considered. I just don't know how something like that would be broadcasted. What energy is making it continue beaming out this echo? Or maybe it's inert, and the human mind picks up on it with its own active broadcasts, like scanning a credit card. Then it's just instructions for the human mind to do things like see images and move stuff. If that was the way it worked, though, that would mean that all videos of apparitions are fake.
Look up stone tape theory. It's basically what you said. Humans are unknowingly constantly giving off energy that their surroundings soak up, and is a way to explain certain ghost experiences. I don't know how much I buy into it, though, especially in instances where you are allegedly interacting with a spirit in real time.
There's this old dirt road where there used to be train tracks. The train conductor of the night shift had a wife. His wife would walk down the dirt road to the tracks and bring him his lunch at midnight every night. There was an accident and the train beheaded/killed the conductor. The wife either refused to believe he was dead or wanted to find his head to bury it with his body. She spent the rest of her days carrying the lantern that she always did, walking up and down the dirt road and train tracks. So now, and for the past 100 years or so on that dirt road, you can go out past a giant dirt mound which was recently put there to keep crackheads out, and you can see the light from her lantern swinging to and fro up and down the dirt road. I've been twice. First time, it was far off, about maybe a football field away down the road. It came to about 50 yards and then vanished. Me and my friends sat there for a while watching where it was, and then it showed up again, but this time about 30 yards. I got ballsy and started walking towards it, and it jumped back, then started moving away from us and then vanished long enough for us to lose interest and leave. The second time it stayed about 75 yards away and kept flickering in and out. The light was low to the ground, and when it moved it seemed to swing, and it was also a golden amber color like an old kerosene lantern. There was no fog, there was no rain or smoke. So I kinda believe the story. Specifically, I'm referring to the South Carolina ghost light in the Somerville area on Light Road.
Parents bought a house that's about 30 years old. Get to renovating. Wanted to just fix a few minor things, soon realized we have to redo the entire building except for the roof and real basic things. Tearing up the ceiling in my future bedroom. Find old newspaper clippings with obituaries and small burnt-down black candles. Laugh it off as there was probably a hippie community living there 30 years ago, tripping balls high with wannabe rituals and the like. Tear-down wallpaper, etchings of skulls and pentagrams behind it. Still think some hippies were having a bad trip. Laying out the new parquet in the same room as I see someone walk from the bathroom past the door, right through the staircase's beginning handrail, and apparently into the open space above the stairs leading down. Start thinking more about the candles now. Happens several times after that. Some simple shadowy figure following paths that apparently don't exist anymore keeps passing my peripheral sight. Tell parents, they sort of shrug it off. Had creepy experiences together with my mom, so she's mildly concerned. She gets hit to the head by a cupboard a few days later that seemingly pushed itself off the wall for no apparent reason. Me and Mom are a bit more than mildly concerned by now. Dad doesn't give a damn. A long time passes without incident. We keep tearing the house up. Be in the basement painting 2 huge paintings as my dog suddenly fights its way down the stairs. Clumsy golden retriever who hates stairs and avoids taking them at all costs. Walks up to me, apparently very irritated about something. Tell her to calm down, kinda glad to have her with me since we're alone in the house and it's getting late. Around 10ish in the evening. Get back to painting. Dog walks to the foot of the stairs, looks up and then looks at me as if urging me to come up with her. Tell her to calm down again and that everything's fine. Dog decides to bail and climbs stairs in a surprisingly nimble way. Get quite scared but decide to keep painting. Do another paint stroke as something smashes the palette from my hand, sending it straight down to the floor where it shatters to pieces. Nope. Bailed out of there, grabbing the dog and basically fleeing from home. Step out of the house and get a phone call from my best friend.
Yo, Anon, I had this weird feeling about something being wrong with you. Are you alright?
He's just passing by a few streets down the block. Meet up with him and wait till my parents get home. Parents get home, tell them about the incident. They laugh it off again at first, and are more concerned when they see the messed up palette. Things calm down as we start to rebuild the house. Everything's been quiet since then, very much enjoying our new home now. I'm guessing the ghost was a former occupant of this space and thought we were gonna tear down his home. I tried talking to him a few times, but to no avail. As soon as he apparently realized that we were upgrading the house instead of demolishing it, he decided that we are chill. Still kinda expect some form of apology from him for hitting my mom with a cupboard.
Many things in that particular apartment, mostly involved with disrupting sleep, but not entirely restricted to that. A few examples would be, on several occasions I heard my ex coming home, or so I thought. Downstairs door opens and closes. Footsteps shuffling up the stairs with weird arbitrary bumping, as if someone were flailing their arms about while ascending. Pull the door curtain aside, the noise instantly stops and nobody is there. TV plastic would start creaking very, very frequently, as often as 30 seconds to a minute or two in between. As soon as we laid down to try to sleep, sound could be recreated perfectly by a gentle nudge on the back or front of the TV toward the top. Would wake up every single night in the winter with my comforter pulled off and freezing. But it was not as if I had kicked it off, as it was perfectly rippled at the end of the bed, which I could also recreate by tugging either side of the blanket a few inches at a time until the resulting ripple fold emerged. There's many more examples, some more bizarre, some less, but the main takeaway for me was none of these things ever happened anywhere else, and I was feeling more disturbed over time that even my co-workers took notice. Any of the things could be somewhat easily explained away, but over the course of a year it all compounded to irrefutable levels as far as my personal experience is concerned.
That's a great story. I've heard a lot of stories like this, and that's exactly why I want to figure this out. Not all of the stories are fake, I'm sure yours is true. So what does it mean? How can sense be made of this?
Brother, I gave up trying to make sense of it. All I can gather is there is much more to reality than we even remotely know. Forces in place beyond our understanding. I appreciate you believing me, as I understand my anecdote is somewhat incredulous despite not relating some of the most bizarre occurrences. I would have had a hard time believing most of what I went through had I not personally gone through it. I never saw anything in the apartment, but I sure heard plenty.
If weirder stuff happened, I definitely want to hear it. Like the other guy was saying, it all comes back around to humans. Your ghost is acting like a human, climbing stairs and pulling off covers. Somehow we create these things.
Weirder stuff. Okay, so this wasn't the same apartment, and was a one-off occurrence, but definitely most prominent considering the severity. Same ex I mentioned before, and I were watching something in our living room. Calm night, probably around 10. We heard one of the loudest bangs I've ever heard come from the kitchen, like an explosion. Follow X rushing to the kitchen to find her gawking. I realized half the cabinets are ajar, varying amounts. I realized all the cabinets had simultaneously slammed open with what sounded like enough force to splinter them. Back in the other apartment, more occurrences. Random, arbitrary vibrating while laying in bed, as if a washer was rhythmically moving us from an adjacent room, but this definitely not being the case. Things vanish, then reappear in obvious places the next day. One night during a storm, we started hearing a random tone coming from somewhere. After investigation discovered, it was the air sensor that gives off a shrill tone when unplugged in the vacant downstairs apartment that happened to be unlocked. It was placed upon the mantel above the fireplace. Nobody lived in the first floor apartment either, but that door was locked. The front door to the building could not be closed without slamming, and we never heard anybody leave, so I am left without explanation as to how the sensor got moved. So this next one isn't a haunting experience, but definitely my most unique paranormal experience, I think, even considering the cabinet slamming. When I was in 6th grade, a friend and I were at a park after dark and we were talking. Suddenly I start seeing something form in the sky over his head. The best and most accurate description would be as if I took a marker and slowly started drawing an arch in the sky. As if the sky were a blackboard, this thing started appearing, slowly arching across. Its tail is growing ever longer and remaining perfectly stationary and in line with where it began and continued. I was clearly dumbfounded, and my friend said, "What?" And I just point. As he turned within an instant, the point where it had been progressing changed its trajectory by about 20 degrees and no longer curved, but was straight from that point to where it ended. As soon as it had changed direction, the rest of the formation was instant before the entire thing instantly vanished just as fast. He saw it just as it changed trajectory, so it was mostly just a flash for him and like a 7 or 10 second experience for me. Absolutely not a meteor or asteroid.
One thing that sticks out to me is that some people, such as yourself, have stories about these sorts of things happening to them in multiple locations and situations. It's tempting to think that maybe some people are more likely to notice happenings like this, while others don't even realize that something abnormal is happening, but the cabinets smashing themselves to smithereens is something anyone would notice. Personally, I've never had one of these experiences, but I'm perceptive, and I've had times in my life where if too many weird things are going on I notice and start getting freaked out. So that leads me to think that some people are more prone to having the experiences. Like maybe there's something about you or your ex that makes these things happen.
Absolutely. Things are always happening that go unnoticed. Many people are vacantly unobservant as well. It's when odd things happen repeatedly or can be corroborated by a peer and peers. And like I said, the one apartment was really the only place I felt I was being haunted. There may have been something up with my ex, like some sort of entity attached to her. She claimed as much herself. I just know I grew up skeptical, but not arrogant, and kept an open mind. In retrospect, I am almost certain I was being haunted as a kid, but it was much less intense for the most part than what I experienced later in that apartment. What I experienced as a kid could easily be explained away if it only happened once or twice, but it happened many times. I would smell this foul odor in my bedroom, and it would come and go and vary in intensity and location. Could not get my mum to agree to smelling anything off-putting until the smell literally permeated the room and she finally agreed something was off. I've smelled dead animals and mold and rot. This was reminiscent of those things, but not quite particular to any. Hard to describe. Have still smelled this thing in recent years during visits. Not guaranteed, but has still been there. Could be a perfectly reasonable explanation, but I haven't heard one I agree with yet. My gut just tells me something is up with it. Hard to explain.
Yeah, to be clear, I agree. Probably half the population wouldn't care enough to mentally check if something odd lined up with reality before they forgot that it happened. I personally have had some odd experiences when I was younger. Like I was in a psychic incense and crystal shop, and I managed to spin the telekinesis spinner in a glass case. Another time I was at my cousin's house, and I mentally focused on making a candle flare up. The flame got bigger, and my cousin noticed and said, "How are you doing that?" When I hadn't even announced that I was going to try. She just saw me staring at the flame and the flame getting bigger, and it was clear to her what I was doing. I would wager this stuff is somehow specific to you or people in your life. It's interesting that each location has different stuff specific to it. Since we don't know how this stuff works, it could turn out to be fairly complex. I feel like men and women interact with this part of reality differently. Like maybe you're some kind of activator, and when your energy intersects with your mother's, you get the hauntings of your childhood and later visits to the house, and when you intersect with your ex, you get the poltergeist activity. However it works, it definitely seems person-specific.
I would agree that certain aspects would be specific to certain people, but I've also heard enough anecdotes of people having shared similar experiences unrelated to each other at specific locations to feel that it's more than just the person experiencing it. Everybody is going to have their own unique thoughts and ideas for any given experience. I've always tried to be rational and be a champion of logic and reason, still am. But certain things cannot be rationalized. Those are the experiences I consider paranormal. There could be a normal explanation unrealized, or it could really be something too complex and out of this world for us to understand or explain with our current understanding. It's definitely fascinating either way. I do believe I was doing something before this life, whatever it may be, and will likely move on to doing something else after. Only time will tell.
Right, the haunted location is a pretty well-established idea. I am skeptical of that since the reputation of a haunted house precedes it, and that primes people for the experience. I stayed at the B&B of one of my mom's friends, and she claimed that there was a ghost there that moved stuff, and one of its favorite things to move was a specific drawer which she pointed out to us. Later, while my mom and I were in the kitchen, I jumped up and down on the floor, and that drawer slowly slid out with every jump. There's so many moving parts to these things, and I'm almost certain that while some categories of experience are currently scientifically unexplainable and governed by the esoteric and the sublime, others are entirely coincidence and wishful thinking. Like how alternative medicine has some of the best solutions and some of the worst scams. It's on the edge, you can't take any of it for granted. Man, the stuff my mom is into. She'll be talking to some pet psychic who can name what color our dog is or whatever, and she thinks it's this magic wisdom. You are standing right in front of her, and you know what color the dog is. What's more likely, she can psychically see the dog miles and miles away, or she can look into the mind of the person standing right in front of her.
True enough, for sure. I think a vast majority of experiences people claim could likely be coincidence or something benign unthought of, such as your drawer example. Also with psychics, especially in this day and age, it's very easy to stalk someone's FB and get a lot of info. If you were naive and I started giving you somewhat vague but accurate details about your life, I could probably convince you of my psychic powers. Though I do believe there are true mediums, many are indeed frauds. My mother has some pretty wild stories, and I feel like she is somewhat psychic, which may explain my sensitivity. One story is that before my step-granddad passed, he screwed over our side of the family because my mum's mum died before him. He altered her will to exclude our family from inheriting the camp that my mother grew up with. He passed a few years later, then came to her as a spirit saying he needed to talk to her. She said she didn't see him but could hear and feel his presence. She didn't want to talk as she was still very hurt and upset. He was adamant over the next day or so and she got little sleep because of it. She was out on her walk when she finally broke down and dropped to her knees. She said she felt his presence strongly and then he apologized profusely for what he had done. She eventually forgave him, but when she tells the story I get chills. All of us kids adored the guy growing up. He was really good with us.
This isn't a story I have experienced myself. My brother told it to me. Brother works at a very old dairy, like from the 1800s, which needed a total renovation because the owner bought the property to make a restaurant. One day I decided to come pay my brother a visit and see where he works. That day they had to finish the bar area. Beneath the bar area there were a long pair of old stairs which led down to the old wine cellar in the basement. We had to go down there, since all the liquors were stored down there. Before we went down there my brother warned me that the cellar could be pretty scary, but I thought it would be okay. We go down there and there is no electricity. My brother takes his flashlight to get some light. The cellar didn't even look like a cellar. It looked like a tomb. We were there for only 5 minutes and during that time, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was down there with us, watching us. Fast forward a few days. I'm at home, just sitting at my computer. Suddenly my dad rushes in and asks me for the keys to the car. My brother had an accident in the old machine room. The buildings were really huge and were filled with tons of small and big rooms used for all kinds of things. I asked what kind of accident, and my dad just said my brother's co-workers had called him and asked to come and get him since some really strange things had happened. I decided to tag along. When we arrive at the dairy, it's night time, we see my brother's co-workers wave us in their direction, towards the old machine room. When we get in there, my brother is sitting in a corner, totally pale and can't stop crying. He never cries. My dad asks what happened. And one of the co-workers told us that he was with my brother when it happened. Working late at night, as usual, my brother and his co-worker had to clean the old machine room for junk and so on. At some point they decide to take a break, so my brother sits himself on an old workbench. According to my brother and the co-worker, something pushed my brother off the workbench with extreme force, throwing him a few meters to the floor. We talked about it for 30 minutes, and decided to take my brother home to sleep it out. Before he went to bed he took off his t-shirt. I got a huge shock. On his back there were 2 purple marks from the impact. The next day the owner of the building heard the story. He believed it so much he hired some woman to come and feel the place/cleanse it of ghosts. The lady arrives and wanders around the place for like 2 hours. I have to admit I thought she was a dumb fraud. Anyway, she returns and looks exhausted as hell. We ask if it's all clear now in a rather sarcastic tone and she just stares at us and says very calmly, "I have never banished so many souls, but should all be clear now." At that point, she got our attention, so we asked if she could share any details. She told us that the reason my brother got the feeling someone pushed him is because he pushed him. Apparently long ago, an old man worked at that very workbench, and I don't expect you to know much about the rules around a workbench, but you never sit at a workbench. So the old man threw my brother off it. Furthermore, she told us she went into the wine cellar and found a woman standing down there. She told us she had been killed in the 1800s. Apparently she got locked up down there, and since people didn't visit the cellar that often, she died due to starvation. And finally she had banished 2 children, who lived on the 2nd floor of the building. Apparently they fell down from the balcony and broke their necks while playing. Fast forward a few days again. I still call BS on all the ghost stories. Until the previous owner of the property paid a visit. Apparently he is also an expert in local history. We told him the whole story and he said, "Wow, that's really something." The next day he came back with some old local papers. The old papers were extracts from the local newspaper from the 1800s. He read the headlines out loud from the first one. Jensen's kids fell to their death from the balcony last Friday and broke their neck. Funeral is expected next Sunday. At this point I'm shocked. Well, we all were. The previous owner put down the paper and took a new one up. Larson died last night because of a previous broken arm. The dairy is now looking for someone to take his place at the workbench in the machine room. Sadly, he couldn't find anything about the woman in the cellar, but to this day I have never even thought about going back there. The restaurant is up and running and I have heard the current owner say that the place is ghost-free since the cleansing. I don't even know what to believe to this day.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.
There's also a Rumble archive as a backup.